You have to give me control, I think. There we are. Thank you. So the first question is, who are we designing for? As architects or planners, we are unlike poets, artists, singers. We just cannot go out and practice our craft at ease because the kind of field that we are intervening in needs a patron. Just because I have a very good idea of what a house should look like, I cannot just manifest a piece of land, funds, and start implementing it. Of course, I can make a lot of drawings and post it online on Instagram and other social media, but that does not really give a full experience from design to matter. So unless we know who we are designing for, we cannot really understand what are the different forces at play when we design. So first, I would like to then see who engages architects in India. I mean, there is few hundreds of colleges of architecture in India, and I think there are about 55,000-60,000 practicing architects registered in this country. But who are we all working for? So if you look at the wealth pyramid, I could not find later statistics than this. But if you look at the wealth pyramid, and here we are not looking at the income, we are looking at total wealth, which is your savings, what you can access as credit and stuff like that. So almost, I would say 63% of India has less than 10,000 US dollars. So that means 75,000 rupees as wealth. So the architects are not being engaged by 63% of the Indian population. That's for a given then. So who are we then working for? So we are basically working for 2.7% of the population. These are the people who may actually have the financial means to build something, either as individuals for houses, housing, apartment blocks, institutions, factories, hospitals, schools, whatever you can take up. But it is only the 2.7% of the population that is actually engaging with architects in this country. And of course, there is another very negligible percent of the population which has more at their disposal than the 2.7%. But these are not the people who will engage architects in India. They have the means, they have the network, they have the reach. They would rather go and get star architects from developed countries. So what are we doing with this 2.7% who we interact with? Now, that is a question I would like to address today. But then there are other things besides just designing and building. Most architects are, we have certain things that preoccupy most of us, and there are certain concerns. But if you actually distill down, and I'm not talking here of our concerns in terms of what is life, what is universe, what is my place in this universe. No, I'm talking about professional concerns. So when I talk to a lot of architects and we have conversations over dinners, conferences, workshops, pre-COVID times to say, and I realize a lot of young architects, they are concerned about the economic sustainability of the practices that they want to set up. They're concerned about what are they going to be able to do, what kind of projects that they will get. Then once they have reached a level of survival, that means they're economically sustainable, what is the next thing that they look for? They look for recognition from their peer group. Almost all these conferences on planning and design are either architects speaking to architects speaking to students of architecture, and architects speaking to students and other media people who are covering architecture. We don't seem to have an audience beyond our own peer group in a way, which is kind of distressing for me because we are building for people, but the people are not interested to listen to us. And when they have gone beyond the second stage, where they have achieved recognition from the peer group, most of them seek celebrityhood to become star architects. And this is the kind of growth path that I see in 99% of the architects. There's not much variation. There are few that I meet, very inspiring, who are often doing things which are outside the public eye, but you never meet them in conferences. They never get invited to colleges of architecture to be visiting faculty or advisors or present things and other things. So in a way, our spectrum of communication, influence, visibility is very, very narrow. So to summarize, we're working for only 2.7% of the population, and we converse with even smaller percent of the population. So if you look at that, it is almost like you're whispering inside your own echo chamber. You're not even shouting in your own echo chamber. So do we have a social responsibility? If we do feel that we have a social responsibility, do we have any leverage? Do we have a voice on the socio-political stage in India? This is a question that I often ask myself, and I ask a lot of my friends who are in the field of planning and architecture, that we talk so much. We talk about sustainability, we talk about resilience, we talk about a complete review of the architectural academia. We talk about how city planning should be done, development controls, the building bylaws, and how things are outdated. But all this talk is like within an echo chamber. Very little of it actually reaches out into the public in terms of awareness building, in terms of building of capability of people to actually support us to have a voice on the socio-political stage of India. And going further, then if you say, okay, forget about a larger stage, forget about a larger audience, just look at within our own echo chamber, within our own peer group. How are we perceiving the role of design? When we are in the classroom, in the schools of architecture, how is design perceived between the studio directors, visiting faculty, and the students of architecture? What is it that we think in the back of our mind's eye when we talk about design? When we talk about design to our peer group, or when we talk about design to our friends who are not from the same profession. And if we are very brutally honest, it's very much the look and the aesthetics. It is like we want to showcase how we can manipulate the visual experience of the observer, rather than looking at how we are actually engaging with the inhabitor. So it's like if I would plan a city, my city plans engages the observer from a bird's eye view. Like you see the city of Amravati and all the other cities that in the last 1 decade that were showcased by various governments that have been put into power. We always see a bird's eye view. It's so beautiful. It's well laid out. There's all kinds of streets, landscapes, buildings with roof forms and everything. But what is it that the person who will live, function, and be part of the life, the social fabric of the city, what is their experience in terms of quality of life, moving through these spaces, having a livelihood, accessing the social infrastructure, having children who will then grow up there? These are things that have far-reaching effect on the society that we're building. But this is one of the very unspoken topics, or let's say almost hardly spoken about topics. It's all a visual experience, and our focus is almost always on a visual experience. But on the other hand, look at just a few things. In terms of education and skill, livelihood is very important, having a job. People need to survive. People need to eat. Now, if you look at livelihood and skills, education and skills, almost 92% of the population of this country, or let's say 487 million of the total workforce in India, is in the unorganized sector, which means a sector that has very little regulation, safety standards, proper lighting, ventilation in the buildings, energy systems that are efficient, conservation of building materials and spaces. No, it's not that. Now, when you look at that, that 92% of people in the workforce are actually working out of structures that are unregulated because their jobs are unregulated. And out of this 92%, 50 to 50% are actually employed in the construction industry. And yet, this 50% that is employed in the construction industry does not have a structured skill training system. And this is quite dramatic when you think about 300 million people or 245 million people are employed in a sector which does not really have any kind of structured training program. Then look at the cities they live and work out of. Okay, out of the 1.2 billion people that are in India, 1/3 live in cities. And out of this 1/3, 65 million live in what is called unauthorized settlements or slums. So that means 1 in 6 person in this country is living without proper housing, access to clean drinking water, sanitation, assured health care, education. And no wonder then India in the Environmental Performance Index ranks 168 out of 180 countries. I know that there is this whole perception over the last, I don't know, a decade since the economic reform that happened in the early 90s, and after 2 decades of a certain emergent middle class with cash flow, there has been a perception that we are almost a developed country. And the key word here is almost a developed country. But this almost a developed country people live in a certain system of selective blindness, which does not show how 1 in 6 person in the urban area where they have emerging middle class is living in very precarious conditions. And India as a whole, 20% of the population doesn't have clean water. And in terms of gap of sanitation, when you look at the ground situation and the statistics, there's a considerable gap, which cannot be documented and presented in a very systematic manner too, because we don't have the means to document it. And finally, coming to the housing shortage in urban India. As per 2019, I'm sorry I couldn't find statistics from later. Maybe they are there, but I know. Okay, from 2019, we have a 10 million unit shortfall in urban areas, which means basically economically weaker section and lower income group, which is part of that 67 million people, 67% of the population. Now, do we in our schools of architecture, in our conferences, in our workshops, in our social interactions actually talk about how are we addressing sustainable housing projects for economically weaker section? No, it's a very specialized segment of planners who, with the government of India, are expected to address that. All the rest of us hope to get projects which have a bigger budget so that we can visually manipulate space to show how clever we are. But on the other hand, when you actually come down to the reality of practicing as an architect, and if you just say, forget about the Vastu, take the same 9 squares and you put the architect in the middle and look at all the various areas of interaction and activity that the architect is expected to participate in, take responsibility for, but how much of it we actually can regulate and be an equal decision maker. Like if you look at the program brief, now, very few schools of architecture actually teach how to develop a program brief. The program brief is given to us either by the clients, the developers, institutions, or whatever. It's a given. You're told this is what you have to design for, a lobby with three stories of atrium and ultra luxury rooms for a resort, this, that, and everything. And you have no say in saying, okay, what is the footfall? What is going to happen? How are we going to pay for it? No, because the financing is also out of your hand. The system, methodology, and access to financing is what drives the project, and that's a completely segregated group that deals with it. Only thing that you know is that they tell you we need to have complete returns in 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever is the cost of money that will be said to you. Timeline. There's a general perception in India that less time you take either for designing or building, the cheaper, not I wouldn't use the word cheaper, more cost effective the building is. Okay? Now, if you actually sit down and look at how this perception has come about and question every step. So, for example, if there's a developer coming and telling you, I want to build 2 apartment blocks, and each block will have a set of 80 apartments, 2 BHK, 3 BHK, and 1 BHK, with ground floor still parking. I want to have a clubhouse, I want this, I want that. And today is the 15th of June. Can we have the drawings by the 30th of June? Why? Because then I can actually get the financing together, I can work with the PR people, I can do this, I can do that. So basically you are actually going to influence 160 households, lives of 160 households, the financing of 160 households, 2.5 acres of land somewhere in the peri-urban area of one of the cities or towns, with actually no time to look at the watershed, energy, water conservation, impact on the local environment, the kind of employment generated, what will be the operative energy, none of this thing. Because the main thing here is how fast can the design be done? Because anyway, architects are paid a miserable percentage, which is totally out of proportion to the investment that is done. And so most architecture offices, I realize in this country, if they have to be viable, run triple the quantity of projects that their staff can actually handle in a meaningful manner to just be able to cover the overheads and the cost of running the. So of course none of the architects have the time to spend more than 2 weeks. Then design decisions. You finish the design, you make the 3D, you make a walkthrough, you do all kind of things, you hand it over, but finally when the project goes from the drawing table to the land, there are design decisions taken which are communicated to you, and you adapt them to the original design. Who is making the design decisions? The market, the financing institution, the whims of the developer. We have no idea. It is a kind of a khichdi of things and we have to accept it. And the architect has very little say in it. Materials and technology. Now, if you are somebody who wants to try something new and you think that's possible, you do your market research, you actually go out and find out, and you just suggest even a 10% change in the kind of building materials used or a little change in the kind of technology used, there is an all-encompassing statement that is told to you by the developer or builder, Madam, it will be more expensive. How will it be more expensive? We are going to be using construction, demolition. No, the material will be cheaper maybe. The labor will cost more. It will take more time. I will have to come up with specialized process. So whatever saving you're doing in changing the material to have something more sustainable with less embodied energy, lower carbon footprint, to the developer, it's going to cost more. So finally, no way, Jose, you have to go back to the conventional building materials and technology. And then the tendering process. I have no clue who or how this immutable tendering process was set in place in this country, where 80% of the decision making on who will build the project is based on the lowest cost factor. It is not the skill, it's not the kind of team he has or the equipment he has or his past reputation. No. If the lowest bidder gets the tender, that is written in stone. And then the construction process, as I told you, 50% of the unorganized sector labor is construction labor. Who are they? I mean, COVID has helped us to identify who these people are. We even know their origins now and their destination. Basically, these are migrant labor from distressed rural areas which are debt-ridden, who come to work in cities and live in miserable conditions, who don't actually get paid in cash in their hand at the end of the day. There are labor contractor providers who send part of the money back to the families, whether it's Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Orissa, wherever, and the rest is held. And then a COVID happens, and what do we see? People struggling to get back home because they don't even have the cash to be able to feed themselves when they walk. And these people are the ones who are building the cities that we live in. And the most, how do you say, the worst joke is, since the migrant crisis happened, we have all kind of governmental committees that have come up in most cities that is talking about affordable rental housing for migrant labor. I'm part of 2 of these committees, so I can talk about it. And we are talking about how to build cheap, good houses that they can rent while they are working to build houses for us. Nobody is asking them, like, if they are building houses for us, why do we need to build for them? They have the skill to build for us, but they don't have the skill to build for themselves. When I ask this question to most of the secretaries, under-secretaries in the meetings, say, no, madam, but you see, we are responsible for the tendering. We have to keep the prices down. We cannot put the money in their bank account and just give them land on lease. We have to build and give it to them. While they build and give us our government housing, but we will build and give it to them. Beneficiaries will not be involved in housing. And finally, no matter what kind of building is built, whether it is the high-end 5-star hotels and international schools, or just gated communities and 2 BHK, 1 BHK apartments, nobody cares what happens post-occupancy. Because the savings that is done on time, building materials, tendering, construction projects, efficiency of designing and all these things, once you're out of the door, you're out of the door. The kind of input, both in terms of capital and time, to keep the building functioning after 5 years with its MEP falling apart, the finishing falling apart, the communication system falling apart, and the kind of expenditure that has to be carried over by the occupant, who also often lives in poor climatic conditions inside because of poor ventilation and lighting. They put an AC and blow up the whole system because it's not wired for that. And you look at all this and you say, but there's a big dissymmetry here. The way the challenges of practice are and the education that we provide in colleges, do we actually deliberately hide from the students of architecture that they are going to be meaningless minions feeding a system that they have no control of? Do we ever tell each other, like, between the role and responsibility that we have as an architect, how little decision-making power we have? And nobody ever discusses, like, between the output demanded from the architects and very little control over the supply chain, how come we are one of the service providers who is the least needed? We are kind of like the packaging unit. Everybody else puts up with us, whether it's MEP consultant, the structural consultants, others, they put up with us because we are just the packaging agency, finally. But who is responsible for the collateral damage? to the built and natural environment finally? It's usually the architects. You know, when things don't work, we are constantly be told that, no, this is not how it is done, you know. So, okay, am I still audible, visible? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, because I have seemed to have a distress phone call from somebody in Bombay, so I thought maybe I'm offline. Yeah. So, going to the next, what are we doing about the output of globalization? You know, when we look at our role as architects and designers. Just give me a minute. I can't put off this phone. I don't know why. I just unplug it. Okay. Right? Done. Okay. Sorry about that. So what is the output of globalization and its impact on the role of architect and design, especially in India? When you ask yourself that question, in a way, nothing has changed in the way architects work between 1970, 1990 to 2020. You know, only thing that has changed is now we sit in front of a screen, we have some few software instead of bending over over a table. It is the entire market structure has changed, but the non participatory model of development in this country is such that we study about sustainability in School of Architecture, but when we go out into practice, there is really not much in terms of points of intervention where you can practice what you've learned, or you can learn while you practice. So in a way, is the framework and content of architectural education acknowledging the changing paradigm of development? No, we are continuing to teach architecture as if the way development is happening today in this country is almost the same as 30 years ago. And thus, what happens is that most of the architects just go through a series of steps and establish a path of professional career that is not so dissimilar than 30 years ago. Only thing is that the competition is higher. So you cannot really expect almost 90% of the architects in this country to actually bring about change in the way we plan, design, and implement. It would be very, very unfair to ask them to take the responsibility and shoulder to bring the change, because they don't have the leverage, they don't have the voice, and they don't have the decision-making power. They are not even sitting at the same table as the people who are making the decisions. So who do we then look for? We have to look at the star architects of India. We have quite a few of them now. They have arrived. They have the power. They have the audience. They have the audience of the public. They have the audience of the, the economically higher section of the population. They have the audience of the decision makers, the politicians, and they have an audience among young architects. So, are they doing it? When we talk to a few of the star architects, we realize most of them are so risk averse. They do not want to step out of their comfort zone and make a political step towards initiating change of how development happens in this country. The effort that has taken to arrive to become a star architect has been such that there is a certain lack of self-confidence that they can use their position now to reverse change. It's almost like philanthropy in India. People become very rich, but they don't become philanthropists. I mean, the government obliges corporates to give CSR funding, but there are no Gates and others in this country, once they've made a ton of money, who actually give back to society. Same with star architects. I can only name one or two who have been giving back to the society and to the young architects. But most of them are very, very insecure about their position. And when you look in contrast to what's happening globally, I would just give you one example. In 2019, in UK, the star architects, they came together and they told the government and the public that this is our manifesto. Today we are declaring that this is how we will work and this is what we will do and this is what we would like to have as a change. So, and the ones who signed up for this declaration then said that they will actually set up a protocol to ensure that any project that they took would meet the basic standards of what would be required to address the issue of climate change, biodiversity emergency. Yeah. Do you think we could have even 10 star architects of India who would come together and create such a manifesto, create an environment where they would declare that to take the role of leadership so that the younger ones, the ones who are maybe even not even, forget about the 35 and below architects, the 55 and below architects, let's talk about them, who have now peer recognition, who could then have the courage also to step up. And this is one of the concerns that I want to address. And this is not the first forum that I talk about here, but I keep feeling if I can keep bringing this up more and more in the webinars and discussions and colleges of architecture and other things, that maybe the younger generation starts to ask and shame us saying, what are you guys doing? You have played the field, but you are actually creating a desert, leaving behind nothing for the next generation to actually live and work out of. So, but of course it's very easy to talk. So I just wanted to then share with you a few projects that, out of the projects that we've done, as to why I have come to this point where I'm actually asking myself and asking my colleagues and asking the star architects of this country, can we actually initiate and take the role of leadership to bring about change instead of expecting the construction industry, the development sector, and the finance sector to give us a space to take the leadership? Because nobody's going to give us the space. We just have to take the space. So let me show you a few of the projects that we have done where we have tried to walk the talk. And what we have been trying to do and what we have learned from our attempts, so that whatever manifesto or declaration or position that we take in trying to bring a change in this country, it's actually from experiential learning and not just words. So one of the first projects that I did just when I was out of School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi, interestingly, was a public building. And it was a building to be built in earth and a complete load-bearing compression structure. Now, the kind of people that I was building for, it was a public building for visitors. I was not going to meet them, but I could interact with the people who were going to be using the building from all of them. And trying to find out what is it that they aspired for, while also trying to look at building construction and technology, which I was totally unfamiliar with. And I must say, while I studied architecture in the 80s in School of Planning and Architecture, we were taught a lot of things. One of the best things that we were taught was how to talk about a lot of things. So we knew how to talk about exposed concrete buildings, the stark minimalism, and the kind of visual experience and the tactile experience and everything. And then suddenly I find myself in the field doing something completely different and actually having to go through a learning process of discovering the systems that drive the process of design, rather than design being a standalone silo of individual creativity. And moreover, the last but not the least is I had to do the construction myself. That means train the people and implement the building. So right from driving the program of the project, which means working on what is it that we build based on the needs of the people and based on the people who are going to actually run the process. This is the Oroville Visitor Center. And this was my first public building, 2 years out of School of Planning and Architecture. I struggled a lot. I struggled a lot in terms of trying to figure out how to create a brief and how to create a brief that would be evolving. Because the kind of project this was, people, they used to do about, hello? Somebody
Yes.
says something.
No, go ahead, Suhasini.
Okay. So creating a brief for a project where I knew there were about 200, 300 visitors a day. And we thought, okay, in 10 years, we will have maybe 500 visitors a day. So a building that will grow. But while during the process of construction, from 200 to 300 visitors, it went up to 1,000. By the time I was building the phase 1, it had gone up to 2,000. When we finished the phase 2, we were suddenly looking at 5,000 visitors a day. And I've been working on this project since 87, 88, and now 32, 33 years later, I still work on this project. You know, we're constantly expanding, growing, changing, modifying. So in a way, for me, this has been my learning field. How do you actually work on a program, development? How do you create a brief? How do you keep it flexible? How do you adapt it? And the next thing, of course, I had to learn is building with earth. I had never studied earth architecture. Of course, we looked at pictures, different type of arches, different types of domes, you know. History of architecture is taught. But actually, it was just history of architecture. It was never actually living in architecture of earth buildings, compression buildings with arches, domes, and other corbelling. So when I started designing with it, and started while designing, learning the construction limitations, the limitations and the constraints of the building material. And there was no electricity on site, there was no running water on site. I had subsistence agricultural workers as my, how do you say, construction labor, and we've trained them to make the mud blocks, build with the mud blocks, train them to make domes and arches. And we also had put for ourselves a kind of a benchmark saying we will be fully solar. Every drop of water that falls on the site will be collected and harvested. All the sewage will be recycled biologically and used for irrigation. Our water needs will be only pumped with wind pumps, which you can see here. And the landscaping will be done only with indigenous vegetation that is drought resistant and can go through a water deficit period. And so, in a way, I was starting not at even a 0, I was starting at somewhere in -10, but had set for myself a program which was had a lot of failures and a lot of challenges. But at the end of the day, the experiential learning that was there, where you did not get limited by failure, but actually learned from failure, was the most amazing experience. And I'll come back to that part because learning, that's what made me question how we learn, you know, because I'm a product of Indian education system. Went to schools, not Delhi board schools, and then School of Planning and Architecture and other studies. One of the things that we learn very fast in schools is actually do not exhibit your ignorance. Because if you say you don't know, you're treated as somebody stupid and challenged, not as somebody who is trying to learn so that they don't remain ignorant. The second thing that we learn is performance. You as a person are evaluated on your performance and not on your how much you learn. So when you come out of that experience and you actually learn by doing, you start to question what is learning. And that's when I realized that architecture, as the way it's taught, there's one thing that academia has got correct in our curriculum. There's a lot of site visits, there's a lot of field visits, but actually it's actually called learning from exposure and experience. But this learning does not happen. We do go out into field visits. We get a lot of students of architecture from many schools into coming to Oroville to visit the projects that I'm done here, because we seem to have some kind of a destination branding of architecture, innovative architecture. But I see the students of architecture who come here. They're making selfies and they're making photos, but they do not learn from the exposure to the built environment and the unbuilt environment, because they've never learned how to use their eyes and connect it to their brains and connect the dots of what they know from what they see. So when they go back, they're not learning by doing, they're actually learning only what is prepackaged and taught to them. And the doing is very separate from what is learned. So there is a big disconnect between what you do and what you learn. And this is not just an architectural profession, actually across the board in education, this is how. And failure is avoided at all costs. So we never learn from our failure. And the amazing thing is that when you fail, you actually will never forget why you failed if you look at failure as a learning experience. But if you look at failure as an experience of social humiliation or being put down, you will only do what you know already how to do, and you'll keep doing always the same thing, because that is how you know you will never fail. So how do we actually then go from conventional way of designing, building, and developing to a more sustainable way of doing it? Because we are not allowed to fail. So we have to continue with the conventional way. And yet we keep talking about sustainable development. Sustainable development actually requires change, but change means there is a risk factor of failure. So this is one of the questions I ask. Why are we so afraid to let the students fail in our schools of architecture? And why do we avoid talking about our failures when we do webinars, conferences, workshops, talk among peer group? We do not want to share our failures. So I'm going to show you another project here. This was a very small building. It's a kindergarten. The design of this project for me was a huge learning experience, because we had children between the age of 3 and 7. And the teachers had a very clear idea of what kind of building they wanted. Because for 20 years, and this is in Oroville, they had about 5 or 6 huts scattered over an acre of land with trees and gardens in between, and the children would just run out of the huts in the kindergarten if the teachers tried to make them focus and do something in a structured manner. The kid would just jump out of the window, run out of the doors, because most of these huts were kind of open, and so they could never keep the kids in. We get very heavy monsoons, so they would go and play in the mud, bring back the mud. And so the teachers, after 2 decades of trying to keep these wild animals inside and focused and everything, told us when we were appointed as architects for this project that they wanted a circle with another circle around and another circle around. So there'll be a central circle, which was the assembly hall. Then the secondary circle was the corridor, and the third circle was like a pie with classrooms all around, all opening to the corridor and to the central hall, so that there's only one exit and entry, and they can keep control of the children. Because I can understand they were spending their days running after them rather than being able to do things with them. So it was so extreme, the kind of functional spaces that the teachers imagined. So we suggested as a team, said, why don't we also do half a day session with the children? We tell them, choose any material you want, and show us what would you like to have as your ideal school. And it was amazing between collages, drawings, putting leaves in a line and everything. And what emerged from the children was they also wanted structured space, but they wanted each space to have three different options: opening out into the garden, opening out into the central hall, and opening out into a space where they could just do activities and not have to take it down, put it away at the end of a school day. And it was amazing. So there were similarities of functional requirement, but very, very different interpretation. So we came up with classrooms around a central hall, but no corridor. One side of the classrooms opened directly into small gardens that was attached to each classroom. The windows on two sides opened out, the doors opened to a private garden, the windows on two sides opened out to a garden, and the fourth side opened out to a very large hall. And this allowed the teachers to have visual access to ensure the kids stayed monitored, but it also allowed kids to open a door and go out anytime they wanted. And we did this also in terms of construction and building technology. We decided to go one step further than the visitor center. Here we did even the foundations in earth. So the walls were in earth, foundations were in earth, and as we wanted to have large span structures, but we wanted to do tile roofs because big roofs like that tend to be heavy and we can't do it with earth foundation. We decided to use tile roofs but with prefabricated RCC rafters, because wood may be a renewable material in theory, but given the deforestation and the slow growth of tropical hardwood, it's not a renewable material, at least in lifetime of one human being. So we transformed structurally what is a joist and wood structure into a space frame with RCC rafters that were prefabricated on the ground, manually lifted and assembled, with large tile roofs. And these were our clients. And it was amazing the amount that we learned from them, not only about the kind of spaces they needed, but even the finishes. If you see the floors, these floors are all red oxide floors. The kids don't want to wear shoes. They want to run around bare feet. We have semi-lateritic soil in Oroville, so it stains the feet quite a bit, and it stains everything, all your clothing, feet, fingernails. So we came up with a red oxide coloring which is very close. We had storage units which were at their level. We had window seats and windows designed that they could operate themselves. So the entire scale, texture, coloring, everything was done in consultation with the kids in a manner that was expressed in drawings, theater, and just interactions with jokes and giggles. So then after that project, I mean, it is nothing. If you look at the thing, it's not great design. It's not going to make it into this, the fancy magazines. It's a roof with walls, but it actually allows the user to have multiplicity of function, and they can adapt the spaces. So then I started thinking, designing. What is it? What do we call a good design? Because when we are in school, they say, this is a good design. Is a functional design a good design? Is a visually spectacular design a good design? An energy efficient building, is that a good design? Is the building that is easy to construct, is that a good design? Is it cost effectiveness a good design? So what is it that we as architects rate in a good design? And if you would look at it honestly, and you realize on a subconscious level, it's always the looks of the building. And when you know subconsciously that other architects and everybody is only looking at the looks, while actually they spend much more time inside, almost every time your building is shaped by that. And then you ask, like, okay, who is judging what is a good design? Is the person who's observing who judges what is a good design? Or is it the person who pays and lives in it who says it's a good design? In either case, it falls short. Just because you pay and live in it, it doesn't mean that you have done capacity building to understand that things can change, adapt, and be better. I mean, we don't do houses in our office so much, we do it once in a while. But whenever we have done houses for people, we realize they come back with something like an Indian thali. They say, my aunt's sister who lived in Spain has brought this back, and this one has done that. And in their house, when the entrance opens, there's a little step down for the living room. So they say a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that, and they want to, whatever appealed to them in 25 different occasions, they want it all put together like a thali and presented to them on the plot of land that they have bought or in the farmhouse that they want to build or whatever. So in a way, the person who pays and sets a design program, the design brief, actually wants more of the same and judges your design based on how good you plug in more of the same together and yet make it look different. Okay, so we really need to question for ourselves, what is good design? Do we continue to work with people who engage us, who are not actually participating in capacity building of saying, okay, how many architects dare to tell their clients, look, what you're talking about is rubbish. On your farmhouse, what you need, because it's outside Hyderabad, it's hot, dry, plenty of rocks, you're not going to have a lush garden like Bali. Just because you had a holiday in Bali, don't ask me to build you a Bali house outside Hyderabad. No, you will lose a commission. So how do we actually bring about change if we cannot even influence the clients that we work for? Forget about the society that we're working in. So I would like to then present this project, which is a solar kitchen. So as you know, Oroville is an international township in making. Sorry, let me have a drink of water. Somewhere north of Pondicherry. We are in a rural setting with very poor transportation link. Now we have very good broadband and OFC and electricity because we have quite a bit of solar energy generation. But when this project was done 23, 24 years ago, we were still a rural, out in the boondocks with very poor transportation link. So again, I built with earth and built with earth blocks that were made from earth excavated on site. And the excavated part was then used for rainwater harvesting and the sewage treatment plant. And this tower that you see in the middle, this is a load-bearing structure. And here on the top part of the tower, I have 50,000 liters of water, a water tank, and it's been there since 23, 24 years. It has withstood 2 major cyclones. But again, in this project, we said we need to push the envelope a little further. Now we know how to build with earth. We know how to build large span structures with earth. And we also know how to do prefabrication so that we don't need a concrete mixer, we don't need cranes and shuttering and scaffolding, which are high end. So we took 3 different things as the new benchmark here. We decided to do large span structure, 10-meter spans in ferrocement, prefabricated on the ground as the kitchen dining spaces. And instead of doing in situ concrete, we did loss shuttering in ferrocement. And we, as you can see here, and we said we will make the building solar passive to the point that this is the dining hall. There'll be one section of the dining hall which will have fans and 2/3 of it without fans. And we will keep it like that for minimum of 10 years to see if people, because most of the people move around on motorcycles and cycles in Oroville, and most of the buildings don't have air conditioning. So I went one step further and said, what happens if we don't even have fans? Can we achieve enough natural ventilation so that the wind speed is good enough using solar passive architecture that your sweat can dry and you feel comfortable? So here in this building, what you see here, just above the windows, if you see there, these little things that are deep set, these are the solar chimneys. And we did the windows with solar chimneys, and the depth of the room, the height of the ceiling were evaluated, so that whenever there's wind speed of 3 to 5 meters per second, we can actually increase it by 20-25%, which is similar to having a fan at speed 1 or 2. And I must say, it has been pretty successful. Mona, who's another architect in Norway, has done a study on it with sensors, wind speed, and everything. It works pretty well. So here we not only built with earth, we decided that we use principles of solar passive architecture for hot, humid climates and see if we can do with lowered operational energy. And the third thing that we went and decided is that it's a kitchen, which is cooking food for a minimum of 1,000 people per meal time, that we will not cook using gas or diesel or wood. We will actually cook using solar energy. So we built a solar thermal device, a hemisphere, which has about 11,000 mirrors stuck on it. And these mirrors are all focused on a boiler arm, which goes up to 700 degrees centigrade and converts water into steam. And then this steam is sent into the kitchen and we cook with it. So with each project, the attempt has been, what is the challenge that 67% of this country faces? Energy, building construction technology, access to building materials, skills in building technology, water, sanitation. So with each project, we try to set a new challenge and try to find a way with low-tech solutions to find resilient solutions. I mean, this building was completed in 1998 and has been functioning since. And the dinners are being cooked every day using solar energy. I think somebody needs to put their sound off. Okay. So now, when you look at it, so let's say I've been talking about design and technology. Then I realized, after having worked for almost 20 years with design and technology at the end of Solar Kitchen project and a few other projects, that I'm able to meet the challenges that we set on terms of design and technology. But we're still not able to meet the challenges of dealing with mindset and social pressure in terms of how people make decisions, how do they make choices, what are their choices based on. We still do not have much role or influence on it. So we started to look at that point, somewhere in early 2000, I started to look very seriously at how do people make decisions? What are the forces that influence decision making? What are the agendas that people have in their mind? What is imprinting them? And looked at culture very seriously, because I know that in India we always talk about Indian culture, and how we in our Indian culture would do things differently. But when you dig a little bit deeper, there are two different things that come out. There is a part of the culture which is arising out of the shared paradigm of physical geography. For example, if you take, let's say, Rajasthan, Gujarat, okay, where I spent some time, desertic climate, rain deficit area, pastoral mode before the, even the cities and other things, there is a direct relationship between food producers, consumers, and the society. And because they are both states which have frequency of climatic disasters, there's a high network of social resilience of helping each other at a grassroots level. There's social capital to come out of disasters. Maharashtra has it a bit like that, like when the Bombay floods, you're not sitting on your hands waiting for somebody to come and do it. There's a social capital that steps up and helps. And there is a culture that emerges from it, which is a very positive culture of self-reliance, of collective community, helping each other and looking out for each other. But then there is another part which is reflected in what I call the Mac architecture, like the McDonald's and others. You go anywhere in India today. If I blindfold you and I stop your sense of smell and put you in the middle of the city of Bhopal, in the commercial district, you look around, You cannot see the language on the signboards, the script on the signboards. And just from the type of building materials, shape of buildings, how people are behaving, if you can identify that it is actually part of an historical center, and take you from there, put you in middle of Chennai, and then put you in the middle of Jalandhar. No, modern Indian architecture post 1970 has something which is so invasive that it's even worse than the coronavirus. It has spread all over the country, this kind of boxy cement, badly finished, plastered over with a veneer and tiles and paints, with shoddy bright lighting, no signage, open spaces which are abused, total disregard for public spaces. The level of individual expression is more in decoration than in form and space. And you really wonder, where is this culture coming from? I mean, if there is a shared cultural paradigm of geography that has given us this sense of community and self-reliance and need to share, but yet there's this culture of visual litter. But as architects, we're always pandering also to the visual dynamics of every building that has to stand out as being unique. So what is it that is driving this MAC architecture of India, which is total visual litter in every city, town of India? And these questions, while I was looking at it, I happened to actually be asked to do a project, which was a Center for Indian Studies in Oregon. And for me,
I'm I'm really
hello?
sorry, but we're running out of the scheduled time.
Okay, I will speed up now. The Center for Indian Studies, we went one step further and we said, okay, let's look at how do we deal with litter. So most of the building is done with recycled materials. What you see here is recycled industrial waste, rammed earth, unpolished stones, and recycled wood, so that we actually deal with what is being treated as waste in India and see if something aesthetic can be brought out that is also climatically appropriate. And I'm going to jump on to the next one, which is actually on the biophysical limits and constraints. How much time do I have? Because I don't see the time. Hello? Okay. Can I have the time?
Yes, Suhasini, go ahead. Yeah, we have 5 minutes.
10 minutes or 5 minutes? 5 minutes?
5
Okay.
minutes.
Okay, the biophysical limits, we then worked on a housing where we tried to reduce the amount of water usage to half the national standards, energy per square meter per person, full recycling, and this is the housing project that we are working with, which has also integration of construction and demolition waste as walling materials. And we went ahead and started looking at full water rainwater harvesting to actually have 40% of the harvested rainwater using passive strategy as drinking water. And that's what we're working on presently, to look at passive strategies of rainwater harvesting with natural system and not these concrete tanks, to create urban sponges and shallow wells to pump it out to use it as drinking water. And so every drop of water that falls between roofs, tanks and everything is collected, harvested, and actually channeled to these sponges, which are landscapes. So you basically end up with roof forms that are compression structures, but also rainwater harvesting structures. So I will then like to finish off with this. So I want to just compare what we have between academics and practice. When we are in academics, we are told designing is sacred, an expression of ultimate creativity. Okay, but in practice of the 3 decades that I've been, what I have realized is design is more a process of integration, optimization, and negotiation. So much of our designing process is integration in terms of human beings, mineral, vegetal, natural, and optimizing and negotiating spaces, negotiating people, negotiating societies. And this part of design is very neglected in our academia. Another thing I must say is every design has to be passionately defended. Design crit means you define yourself. But actually, in practice, defending a design encourages the client and consultant to sideline the architects. We do not learn cooperation when we learn design. We learn actually combative behavior. And we are always told good design speaks for itself. So you just focus on doing good design, that'll speak for itself. But actually, design choices and decisions are so random, you know, and the influencer has more impact than architects. So there's no good design that is speaking for you. A good designer is what speaks for good design. And then climate is about mastery of space, proportion, building materials. But actually, in reality, the untaught part is what architecture is about. It's a synthesis of economics, sociology, communication, politics, conceptual understanding of earth sciences, mechanics, physics, chemistry, financial market. And most of the young architects I work with have no idea of the mechanics and structures and other things. So in the end of the day, what do we look for as an architect? So I've decided to put it into 3 circles and create a Venn diagram. We would all like to have interesting projects with enlightened clients and have a profitable practice. But let's say we don't get the ideal thing, you know, if all the 3 come together, which is A. Now, if only B can come together, which is you have interesting project and it's profitable also, the client can sabotage everything. But let's say if C comes together, you have enlightened client and profitable, and you have an informed decision making and other things, but the project may not be interesting at all. You know, it may not be challenging you intellectually. And if you have interesting project and enlightened client, but you have an office that goes into bankruptcy, you're also sabotaging yourself. But end of the day, I would say you should have at least 2 out of 3. If you don't have 2 out of 3, either you have failed to communicate or you have put yourself in a situation where it's a self-sabotage. Because in the real world, architectural projects are mostly a continuum of mundane projects for groups and for people of questionable capacity. So the real challenge then is how do you make the process of design a mutual learning process so that you elevate the relationship from becoming just one more service provider in the business of development to be actually an informed partner in the whole process of planning and design. And this is where, you know, when you start, you have 2 uninteresting projects, 1 interesting, and then, you know, as you go along with each interesting project, you amplify the learning process between you, the client, and the society, so that at the end of the day, you become the one who drives the direction of development. And then it makes sense for architects, whether it's academia, practice, or otherwise, to be informed in sustainability. Otherwise, let's forget it. Don't keep hammering architects about learning sustainable design. They are never going to get a chance to practice it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. We have the director of the college with us here today. Manoj, would you like to share a few words before we move on to George to discuss this presentation?
Yeah, hi Suhasini.
Hi, thanks.
Hi. I'm
Hi.
Manoj Parmar, director of KRVIA. First of all, we are glad to have you at this platform, sharing your views. You have very well articulated the dilemma or discourses of academics and practice, and especially when we graduate, we are grappling with these 3 scales of survival, sustainability, and credibility. And the last phase is where we actually, it's a very critical, at the same time controversial, when we talk about the credibility. And I think you have highlighted that very well in your first part of the presentation. And the second part, it's really amazing to see the work, that brings certain kind of large ethical discourse. I think this was something very, very important for us, and there is a social ethics, there is environmental ethics, there is a technological ethics, all kind of ethics. I guess I think you are making an effort, huge effort to put kind of a so-called integrated kind of a ways of looking at architecture. So I think I'll open up this for the question answers from students. George, if you want to add anything, George is a faculty at KRVI.
Yeah, I know George. We have met. Yes.
Oh, you know George. All right.
Yes.
Long time back.
Very long time
Object.
back.
Yeah, I remember Suhasini's work, and I remember the first time when I met her also. It was a quiet space because when I was asking, I want to meet Suhasini, and the people who were working, just kids who were there in the office, they were quite saying about. And then when I met and I seen her work, especially the first work, the visitor center, and it's amazing that is about how it grew. And coming back to what you have been, I've just made some notes. And nothing to ask per se, but I have to say something that one question is probably that emerges out of this is that you spoke today about the approach, and this approach needs to. I don't know if I have to use the word change, but I'm saying this approach needs to be more sensitive and sensible, and that approach largely through what you have. I mean, showcased today through your presentation is the process, and the process has let's four wings to in that phase. It begins with the brief, the client, the brief. It begins the brief, and then it goes through stages of design, build, and what we always keep missing is monitoring and maintenance. We never think of doing that. We never think of going back to what we build or design, and we forget. I wouldn't say we forget about it, okay, but I would say that we don't think it is necessary. Monitoring the
No,
post
it's not
occupancy.
even George, it's not even
Yeah.
possible. I mean, if you look at most offices, they'd hardly have
Yeah.
time to do what they are doing for the ongoing
Already.
projects. They can't
You're
wander
right.
off and look. And most
You're right.
cities going from your house to work itself is taking 20% of your working day.
You're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. So I'm just saying that. But whenever you get whenever you get the opportunity, and when you're in that part of the city, in that part of the state, in the country, okay. I mean, do you make I mean, create an opportunity to go and see it and see and talk to the client then? Does that happen?
Yes, it does happen, and it happens even without me going. For some reason, most of my clients, after we finish working with them, and I don't have so many, so maybe that's easier. Most of my clients are usually small groups of people. Very, very, very few are individual clients. So it's like a board for the Crafts Foundation or whatever. I keep in touch with them, and they keep sending me photos also, and they ask me things about how to do this, what are we doing with this, there's a leak here. Because one of the things is that as they have been involved in the decision-making process of the design, and somehow maybe because I'm a bit of a bully also, I keep questioning their decision-making. So at one partner, you become kind of partners, and they are like holding the fort for you, and you are still part of the fort.
Yeah.
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 So there is always a give and take.
Yeah.
And a personal relationship also builds. I mean, you are also a practicing architect. You know that with clients who actually work in partnership with you, you give a lot more, and you take a little more risk also with their approval and acceptance. So that partnership continues further on. And that's what I'm saying. Sometimes building the partnership with risk opens up a long-term relationship, instead of.
And somewhere then building relationship, okay, is actually I think the way you ended the slide, integration, optimization, and negotiation. Okay, these three things actually are the three key components that help build relationship. Because
Absolutely.
so then you have set that relationship, you've set the ball rolling, okay, and that communication is on and open. Okay, so that I think is something always is amiss in academia space. Okay, because we are unable to tie or tie these ends. They're always we leave it for the students to go and find out. But I think more preparedness towards that is something that will help in. The other thing is that I don't know. This is a question again to you. there have been several competitions at various levels, from international to national level competitions, mainly for students and for practicing architects. Okay, there are many. I'm not taking any names here. And do you think, because more and more, I mean, you're engaged with it, your images are being bombarded on your mobile screens, you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook, okay, and more when I see through them in detail, in depth, I'm seeing very similar kind of things. I mean, it's just a representation or drawings that have got really, I mean, I'm seeing this time that students right now, or graduating students, the kind of representation techniques that they bring on board is it's amazing. But sometimes, do you think there's too much of these competition somewhere brings in the other aspect of your presentation, where you've been talking about the star architect, or this performance heavy, where performance becomes a most primary factor if I get a project, okay, where I need to see to it that this needs to have a good building, and so that, you know, it gets photographed, it gets published, I get an award. So I mean, there is always, so one cannot neglect that pressure. Okay, and when you are growing, as like many of these students are going to become architects, and that pressure is always there, how do you wear that off? I mean, you said you just after your graduation, you got the project, and I'm sure that there was this kind of pressure around on you, okay, to perform and to be the best. So something related to.
No, actually, George, unfortunately or fortunately for me, there was not this pressure to perform or be the best. In a way, that project, the first project, public project that I did, and as I said, I built up the program brief, looking at the need in this country. I had gone to an Earth conference, first international Earth conference in India in '87, and listening to the participants and the experts. They were from all over the world, and listening to our government officials, I decided that India was focusing too much on building with earth for the poor. And the poor have the most to lose, but the government was deciding they were the best to experiment on. They were the lab rats. So I said, okay, I'm going to try to make a change there. So I talked to people in HUDCO, talked to the Ministry of Urban Development, waited for months to get this, and then got a grant from them, got grants from different people, built up the program, built up the project, and actually tried to prove to them that public buildings and governmental buildings built in earth would have a larger influence with trickle-down effect, given the Indian cultural way of decision making, which is if the middle class are building with it, the poor believe it's a good choice. If the rich are building with it, the middle class think, oh, I also want that. And if the government is building with it, then the others think, okay, this has a stamp of approval. So actually looking at it like that, and this requires a structured mind. And the structured mind comes from being able to sit back and not be afraid of failure, and not to be afraid to be mocked by, and not to be afraid. You see, you talked about something which was how much the presentation technology has progressed in the last 20 years with the software and the skills and the entire visual platform that is out there, that is bombarding and saturating our senses of how things should be done, so that it looks like it is good design. Okay, we're not talking about good design per se, but that it looks like good design. That is very important. But if you take a step back, it's not just students of architecture and architects who are trapped in this culture of presentation. Whether it's food, whether it's building, whether it's clothing, whether it's education system, we're all trapped in this narcissistic mode that is presently ruling the world. And the entire thing of social media, I mean, almost every office now has one person who manages social media and architecture. यार रोज रोज क्या डालोगे सोशल मीडिया में, बट डालना चाहिए, नहीं तो प्रोजेक्ट नहीं मिलेगा. हु इज लुकिंग एट योर सोशल मीडिया? अदर आर्किटेक्ट्स आर लुकिंग एट. वो दे रहे हैं क्या तेरे को प्रोजेक्ट? They want projects themselves, so they have their social media which you are looking at. So what happens? This is like kind of frogs in a well. So you're all looking at each other's work and you're all doing presentation for each other, and that's what I'm saying. This is a trap. And who is actually benefiting from this trap? Now, this is where I say, why are we so easy to be trapped? What is it that makes us so insecure that we want to have constantly this validation from each other over social media presentation techniques? The professors are themselves insecure enough to not to put aside the best looking submission and go for the one that is focused on design but comes with hand sketches. Yeah, 3D nahi banaya. So 20% marks gone. I mean, one of the thesis external jury, they gave me an evaluation form that has 7 different criterias, and I looked at it. Out of the 7 different criterias, the least marks was for building, and this was for the thesis, least marks was for putting together your program brief and the context and constraints. The maximum was on presentation techniques and on how it was actually going to be looked at. When I tried to argue about it, they said, but all colleges are doing that. And then you guys sit in a college and tell me, but look, everybody's doing that. So somewhere somebody has to say, stop.
Stop it.
Let's stop this.
Yeah.
Who is benefiting from this? I'll tell you who is benefiting from this. It's like we are children who have been given some toy to play with, so that the entire financial market, the entire financial sector can just use us as a service provider for packaging.
True.
MEP guys do not respect architects. तुम drawing करके कर दो यार, हम बाद में देख लेंगे. The structural guy doesn't even read sections anymore. They said 3D दे दो हमें बस. Okay? We don't care for your drawing because they know that they can't read sections. We don't know how to draw sections. Nobody knows what's going on. They're 3Ds. And we will be walking through their endless loop. But somewhere somebody has to ask the question, who benefits from this? It's not the students. If you actually look at them, they are at the edge of their mental trauma, trying to keep up with websites and social media to find out which is the best software that will be more impressive than what their peer group has used last time.
True.
No?
I remember when I was studying, I had one of my friend who used to generate views every day, like just like that. Aaj ho gaya discussion, next day view. I was like, then we were wondering what is he using, you know? And that is when SketchUp was introduced, you know, and we never and he would never disclose. Only when I came to the 4th year, 5th year, when I got disclosed, we came to know, okay, this guy is using SketchUp, free software. Okay. So I think there is this thing definitely around. There's a question from Namya. Do you believe the fact that you had the opportunity to design the projects in a context like Auroville played an important role in the learnings you imbibed because of the open-mindedness of the users towards the idea of sustainability, which is not common everywhere? Second question
No,
to
not
that
really.
is,
I mean, there are 3 parts to the question for me. One part is that, yes, I had the advantage of Auroville. The advantage was that there was the external structure, which is the building bylaws and the development controls and the planning organizations, that was not there. You know, we were given land, you develop the brief, you develop several things yourself with the users. So yes, that kind of freedom is only given to star architects after 45 years of practice when they go on stage and everybody stands up and claps, no? But I got it very early in the career without even realizing the gift I was getting, you know. But I was facing a challenge which most architects in India don't face, is that I was designing for an audience that was largely from developed countries who expected quality. Quality of design, quality of construction, and quality of actually drawings, construction drawings that had a certain quality, that your sections, your reference. So when I work with the 2 or 3 architects here, they look at my sections, they say, yeah, I said, I'm from the best college of architecture. What are you talking about? SPA, you know? And I said, rubbish. There is an international protocol of, and that's when I first learned, George, that drawings are like maps. They are two-dimensional representation of a whole sequence of information that you have visualized in the back of your mind while designing. And these maps, depending on who is reading it, can tell them whether it's for the streets or for the building or the temple. And these are actually two-dimensional informational system, not pretty drawings. I came from the best school of architecture and knew how to make pretty drawings. I didn't know how to design buildings actually because I didn't know how to represent them. You can imagine any shape you want, but if you can't make an informational representation, how will you work with the structural engineer, MEP guys and others? And that's why, you see, if you would look at an architect's role 1 century ago, I mean, architecture and planning is a new profession in terms of a structured learning in this country. But 1 century ago, they were the leaders. They were the ones that the kings and the patrons talked to in India, because they were the ones choosing the site based on the program, getting the craftspeople who were needed, choosing the material, actually getting a whole system of labor organization around the thing. They decided, if you look at even colonial time between Lutins and others, the kind of energy that went into setting up the nursery for the avenue trees, for which avenue, which part of New Delhi, you know, Old Delhi, if you look at what the effort that went into designing the waterways and systems in Old Delhi. So this was done because they knew their physics, chemistry, history, geography, culture. What do we know today? We know 5 softwares. So I'm the master of the universe. I know 5 softwares. I mean, you get job applications like that. I'm versatile in 5 softwares, you know.
True. So that's what I mean. Like, so that's what even Richard Sennett says, you know, that thinking hand in thinking hand. You know, there's a coordination between your head and your hand, and you know, and then you now suddenly you bring another agency in between, and then that gets cut off. You know, and but how do you continue that relationship?
And how? Let me ask you a question, and especially to Shav. How much do you read, and what do you read? I mean, I'm not talking about the swipe left, swipe right, where you don't even complete a sentence. How much do you read to learn about what's going on in the world? To understand how it's connected to development, to be able to influence development, to actually become a better architect. You know?
Shravan, you want to answer that?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of reading. I mean, you can learn so much about architecture by reading outwardly from architecture as well, right? Like what's happening in
Architecture
society
is just
today
a
affects
byproduct.
architecture. Yeah.
Architecture is a byproduct of society. How much do you read about the society you live in? To know
I mean, I
about
think
whom you're building for.
you really need to know a lot about it because, like, there's
Yeah.
as an architect, we have our identity we express through our buildings. And I think it's one of the strongest ways a person can express their identity is your political identity, your identity as a person. Every kind of identity is projected through that structure itself, actually.
Sure. So what did you
Look at it.
read last? Which was the last book you read in the last 1 month?
That's a hard one.
Okay, so what did you read
yeah,
yesterday? If your memory is that
mostly
short
stuff on the
term,
phone.
तुम्हारा RAM इतना छोटा है दिमाग में, so tell me what you read yesterday.
So mostly from the phone. I mean, I remember I was reading.
You see, swipe left, swipe right. Yeah.
It's just more articles and this thing on the phone, like because you don't get
You
time
see,
to pick up a
one of
book
the
these
things that
days.
we do in our office when we get interns, architectural interns, I have 4 modules with them. The first module when they come in is actually just follow one of the architects in the office with ongoing projects, where they start to understand the relationship between design development, construction drawing, and site. When they have understood the relationship between them, then they spend the second module actually mostly working with the site coordination. So they understand the implementation process. So when they have understood the connections, I ask them actually to take up a small design project. Imaginary design, nothing that should take more than a week, and then present it to the rest of the office as if they're trying to sell us their design. And why we do that is to make them understand how much communication plays a role in the design. Because I tell them tomorrow, if Mr. Mukesh Ambani walks into the office, he's not going to wait for you to make a SketchUp 3D and show him. You're going to talk to him, you're going to sell him a storyboard, you're going to make him imagine a space just verbally, and then that verbal interpretation of design with that storytelling is going to make him feel whether he's going to be comfortable with you and you're knowledgeable enough to understand to be an architect. But the last module, which is the most interesting, we ask them to pick up any text of at least 1,500 words, read it, and give a narrative of 500 words on what it is all about. Even if they have to do some research on why the author wrote this, what this, and it's one of the most difficult that they find. They do the first three, kahin na kahin se maarpeet karke kar lete hain. They cannot, they have a difficulty to choose 1,500 word narrative. Then they have difficulty to read through it. After one sentence, 1.5 sentence, they've lost thread in their mind. Finally, when they finish reading, they don't know how to do research on where it is coming, what is influenced by it, why is it written, what era is it, what are the references. No. They will actually pick out, cut, paste sentences, and they will make 500 words out of it. So 30% editing करके उसी author का words use करेंगे.
Yeah, because the art of asking questions is lost. You don't know what to ask.
It's
that's true.
It's like, how do you know you have a good answer if you don't know how to ask the right question?
Yeah.
Shravan,
you want to ask? You have anything
question
to ask?
Pucho, ask me the right question.
I actually do. So, I mean, when you look at the Indian society as a whole, there's this whole taboo around the word failure, right? If someone takes a gap year, someone repeats a year, there's this whole taboo around failure. So, do you think we should be addressing it as a curriculum or as an attitude, or is there any other ways we can address it? Because it's not just architecture, but architecture has its own specific condition that we're talking about. So, do you think
you don't even need to go into academia. Address it in your own personal life. How many times today where you did not understand a situation or a context or what was said, and you didn't dare to ask, what does it mean? How many times today you came across acronyms where you had no clue what it was about? If you Googled, fine, but you're in the middle of 3 people talking and they're talking about something, what are you talking about? How many times did you dare to say that? The day you start asking because you didn't understand even within your friends is when you break the taboo. It doesn't have to be in a structured setting like a school, college, or office. Do it in your personal life and it'll spread like a virus. If Sharvan, who is a clever guy, can ask when he doesn't know, 2 of your buddies who may not be that self-confident as you, they will start asking. My office is full of people asking me questions, so much so that I feel sometimes like, plugging my ears and running, but they start asking questions,
Yeah, and I think we don't have any other question except yeah, I mean that is a follow-up question to Namya's thing. So I was thinking like what Shravan just mentioned, failures. So when it happens when you are in a particular situation and failure is something that stares down at you, okay, and there is a possibility of that, okay, but there is another architect or an engineer or somebody else who is probably more knowledgeable and have done it, okay, I mean at least for the ones who are going to start their career now, okay, when that happens, the best thing is to approach that.
Absolutely.
Right, you would always recommend that, I mean not to because I always feel that there is this fear of not wanting to, okay, because then because then that tends to change many things, equations with the design, equations with the client,
the power structure.
Yeah, so one doesn't want to allow another person to enter the whole that network of people. because there's a fear of losing. So yeah, but I used to always think about that can one approach, and if one does so, then there is a, I don't know, a set contract. If you know this person, then there is based on trust, okay, and otherwise you hire that person or ask a person to collaborate based on some kind of thing. So yeah, I think it was nice after a long time. I don't know. I remember architecture for object and object for architecture. For
Yes,
that
that was the thing. Yes,
and
I
it was
wanted to just make a comment, Sharon,
yeah,
because you see, uh, you must have some nieces and kids below 3 years. George must have a kid. You guys,
yes,
between the age of 2, 3, and 4, what is the thing that every kid says frequently? Why? When does the why stop? When they
yeah,
go to school.
yeah, yeah,
So why is it that our education
yeah,
actually stops the why?
true.
That is the question that you have to ask yourself. You know, it's
Complete agreement.
natural. We as humans have reached where we are because we're extremely curious, risk-taking species,
Hmm.
right? And we want
Yeah,
to stop our evolution and stay where we are. कि सोशल मीडिया में जो आएगा ना उसी से हम खुश हो जाएंगे बस चलो
yeah,
Interesting as this conversation is going. I think we can always catch up later again when we do the interview for the Manifesto. We're really terribly running out of time, or we've already crossed over actually. So thank you again, Suhasini, for being here. Wonderful presentation, and I think very nice interactive session that we've had. Thanks to Manoj for joining in from his holiday.
I'm honored to have invited. When I saw the run-up, like I told you earlier, I didn't know that I would have a place in that run-up. I mean, after Aniket and the 100 Hands guy and others, Bijoy and others.
You're doing
I'm
exactly
honored.
what you want us not to do, Suhasini.
Yeah. Okay. Good evening.
nice,
Thank you
nice
all
talk.
so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye,
Thanks.
bye,
Thanks.
bye.
Bye.
Yeah.